Alright, in this tutorial I will show you how to export geometry from Rhino into Unity. The first thing we need to make sure is that our units are metric. So we type units and then change, if that's not metric, to meters. Set OK and allow the model to be scaled. Alright, so then we have the correct size. It is also a good idea to check whether your model is sitting on the world coordinate plane or flying around somewhere. If it's flying around, it's a good idea to push it down near to the center of this grid plane. Okay, so our goal here is to mesh the Rhino geometries, and what we also need is that these geometries all have materials assigned. These colors Rhino shows us, maybe assigned via layers, will not come across when we export this to Unity. So to generate materials, we go into the Materials tab and always create custom materials. Unity will not be able to read these Rhino materials, or we can call this walls white, for instance, and then another custom material for ramp gray, and another custom material for glass. So you then adjust these materials. The white material doesn't need any adjustments. Let's say this gray ramp also has a texture. So here under color we select the texture. Let's see. There we go for something like concrete. I'm using my texture library here. It's this brownish concrete. When we expand this texture, we must make sure that we do not perform any scaling. So if you need to scale the texture, you would want to UV map this. This is something I can show you separately if need be. And then our glass material would have a little bit of transparency and a little bit of reflectivity, just to differentiate. Alright, so when we have our materials, we should assign them to the objects that have the materials. So that would receive the walls white material. This glass here would receive the glass material, and these ramp geometries would receive the ramp gray material. We can of course check in the rendered view if the materials have been assigned correctly. It looks like it is. So again, this is just for demonstration. I'm not sure if Javia's intentions, whose model I'm using here, are those that I'm using. So back in the shaded view, we can select the objects we want to mesh. By type is a good idea. So I'm just selecting these walls now. I type mesh, which will then create polygon meshes. And maybe you see simple controls in the beginning, which have a slider for fewer and more polygons. I would always try to see what turns up when you put the slider to the left. The fewer polygons we have, the better our simulation will perform. So with preview, we get the numbers of polygons up here, and everything looks pretty good. So here we can use those meshes. If we want to just isolate them, then we can just select meshes up here in the object selection. So we should get 2 meshes, and we can put them on a dedicated layer which I have created. So that would then be mesh walls. And back into our layers, I could actually turn off the walls layer now and the mesh wall layers. So we are left with this glass here. Be able to select the polysurfaces, Click Mesh, slide it to the left, preview, maybe a little diagonal. That's fine. We can then select the mesh and put it on the corresponding mesh layer. And then we can turn off the glass layer and the glass mesh layer. So we are left now with this ramp. Let's see. Select polysurfaces or surfaces. What is it made of? So it just looks like a solid geometry, but actually isn't. So we have lots of individual surfaces here. That is not ideal because that will create very, very many meshes versus, for instance, this object here, which is a closed extrusion, will be only one mesh. So here we would want to fix this model a little bit by, I think, joining those surfaces first. So this is now a closed solid polysurface. That's good. And here we are going to extrude this surface a little bit. And then we have a polysurface and yet another polysurface, which in theory we could also join and then mesh. Let's get the preview. So here we have a few vertices which we may not want. So then we can, because they are all inside a plane, I think at least. So we can go to the detailed controls and try to make some adjustments here. Simple planes is always recommended when you have planar objects. And here, for instance, we can play with the maximum aspect ratio. Let's see what happens when we do 100. The mesh gets slightly cleaner. I'll keep trying to find optimum setting. Yeah, so changing the aspect ratio here to 500 removes these unneeded vertices, and I can hit OK. So there we then have a mesh again, very clean one, which we can move to a layer called mesh ramp. Okay, so this little object should also be meshed. Okay, let's select this mesh and put it on the corresponding layer, so that would be mesh other. And then finally we can just inspect the meshes we have, turn those on, and all the other layers off. So there we are just looking at the meshes, and if we go to the rendered view, we see that the materials have been brought over. Another thing we can do, and that can be helpful in Unity when we have many objects, is select these two wall meshes. And if they have the exact same characteristics, we can actually join them, and that gives us then just one mesh. So that's just one mesh, and this computes faster than two meshes. And we can give this mesh also a name. Let's call this walls. Same with this mesh for the glass. We can call it glass. These object names will then be available in Unity. So this would then be the bench, or assume it is. And this here would be the ramp. Okay, so now just meshes. We can select all of them, perform the command polygon count, and here we have only 136 total polygons, so the meshing operation was quite effective. All the meshes combined in the geometries you use then in Unity, you should not surpass 200,000, otherwise the performance will be suffering in VR. Okay, so with just meshes, and those we want to export selected, we can go to File, Export with Origin. So export with origin allows us to set a point that will be our insertion point where we can set coordinates in Unity and have our handles to drag the object around to a specific position. So I'm going to use this edge here. The file format we are going to use is Motion Builder FBX. We give the file a name. So this would be Caviar model, and we hit save. Then in the export options we must make sure that the lights and diffuse are unchecked. These would then be converted to Unity lights and Unity cameras, which can confuse the simulation, so we just leave them unchecked and everything else can be left as is. We hit OK and we have an FBX file. How to work with this FBX file is then covered in the next tutorial.